Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
They owned her smile, but never her soul. For decades, she was the woman whose smile lit up the world. A smile that sold millions at the box office, that became the very emblem of Hollywood's golden era of romantic comedies. Julia Roberts wasn't just a star, she was America's sweetheart. But behind that iconic smile was a woman slowly disappearing into a cage of perfection, suffocated by the very industry that adored her. What could possibly make the most beloved actress in the world vanish from the spotlight at the peak of her power? Why did Julia Roberts, the queen of charisma, choose silence over scripts, privacy over premieres, solitude over stardom? What no one realized was that the smile Hollywood worshipped was never truly hers to begin with. And the moment she decided to take it back, everything changed. This is the untold story of Julia Roberts. Not the actress, not the icon, but the woman who dared to reclaim her soul. You thought you knew her, but now you'll see her in a light Hollywood never allowed. Before she was Julia Roberts, the global icon, she was just Julia, a little girl growing up in Smyrna, Georgia, a town where dreams felt far away and smiles didn't come easily. Born on the 28th of October 1967, Julia was the youngest of 3 children in a family that was anything but picture perfect. Her parents, Walter and Betty Lou Roberts, were both actors and drama teachers, running a small theater school for children. But behind the curtain of creativity, financial strain, and emotional instability played out like a darker kind of drama. When Julia was just 4 years old, her parents divorced. Her father disappeared from daily life, a fading presence, leaving her mother to raise the children alone. The once vibrant household crumbled into a world of tension and unpredictability. Money was tight, love was scarce, and Julia, often overlooked in the chaos, learned early how to hide pain behind silence. But the deepest scar came when she was 10. Her mother remarried to a man named Michael Motes. Julia would later describe her stepfather as abusive, both emotionally and psychologically. Her half-sister, Nancy Motes, would go even further, calling the household a nightmare. The young Julia, known for her wide, expressive eyes and gentle demeanor, often retreated into herself. She began to build emotional walls tall, invisible but necessary for survival. One of her childhood friends once recalled, "Julia always seemed like she was pretending to be okay, even when no one asked her to. It was as if even then, she was rehearsing not for a role on stage, but for a life where she'd always be expected to perform." She had no intention of becoming an actress. In fact, she wanted to be a veterinarian, but life, as it often does, had other plans. After high school, she moved to New York to live with her older sister Lisa, who was already pursuing acting. It was there that Julia, still wounded, still guarded, was introduced to a new possibility. The idea that maybe, just maybe, pretending could be more than a coping mechanism. It could be her escape. Yet even as she stood at the doorstep of fame, the echoes of her childhood never truly faded. In interviews, she often spoke fondly of her parents' creative influence, but rarely mentioned her stepfather. She almost never spoke of the emotional toll. The girl who had once cried in silence behind her bedroom door had become a woman who smiled on cue, but never truly forgot the weight of growing up unseen. And in a bitter twist of fate, years later, her family history would come back to haunt her in the most painful way possible with the tragic loss of her half-sister Nancy. But that part of the story still lay ahead. In the world's eyes, she was radiant. But in her own home, she learned that even light can cast long, cold shadows. In 1985, Julia Roberts stepped off the Greyhound bus into New York City, with no degree, no plan, and no promise. Just a suitcase, a smile, and the kind of hunger that only comes from growing up, knowing what it feels like to be invisible. Acting wasn't her childhood dream. In fact, she once wanted to be a veterinarian. But something shifted. Maybe it was her sister Lisa's influence. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was the hope that pretending to be someone else might be easier than being herself. She got a modeling contract. She hated it. She tried commercials. They told her her mouth was too big. Casting directors smiled politely and forgot her name as soon as she left the room. Her first role, a single line in the film Firehouse, didn't even make it into the theatrical release. She would later joke that not being remembered was actually a blessing. But she kept going. Mystic Pizza changed everything. A small, low-budget film about 3 working-class girls in Connecticut. The script was simple, the budget tighter. But the moment Julia appeared on screen, there was a shift. Not just in the movie, in the air. Something electric. She wasn't trying to be beautiful. She wasn't trying to act. She simply existed raw, real, and unforgettable. Critics didn't just notice her. They circled her name. Hollywood called. Suddenly, she wasn't chasing roles. Roles were chasing her. And then came Steel Magnolias. Surrounded by legends like Sally Field and Shirley MacLaine, Julia was expected to play the sweet young thing and stay in the background. But she didn't just hold her own. She stole the screen. Her portrayal of Shelby, a fragile but defiant Southern belle, brought audiences to tears. At just 22, Julia Roberts earned a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination. She became a symbol of something rare: youth, talent, and undeniable charisma, all wrapped in that now famous smile. But what no one saw was how quickly that smile became a cage. The scripts piled up. So did the expectations. Romantic comedies, tearjerkers, legal thrillers. She was America's favorite escape. Men adored her. Women wanted to be her. Magazines couldn't stop printing her face. Paparazzi parked outside her apartment, waiting for her to walk her dog or buy groceries. Suddenly, Julia's life wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the public. She was offered Pretty Woman, a modern-day Cinderella story. At first, she said no. The original script was dark, cynical. But when it was rewritten, softened, and paired with Richard Gere, something clicked. The film exploded. Julia became a phenomenon. Pretty Woman didn't just make her a star, it made her a brand. But at what cost? The smile they adored? It wasn't always real. After the film's success, she was labeled difficult for asking questions about her roles. Tabloids tracked every relationship, every rumor, every dress she wore. Her engagement to Kiefer Sutherland crumbled days before the wedding. The headlines screamed betrayal. She ran to Ireland, seeking silence. But even across an ocean, the flashbulbs followed. She once said in an interview, "I was smiling so much, I forgot what it felt like not to." She made millions. She sold out theaters. But with each blockbuster came a deeper silence inside. No one asked her what she was afraid of. No one cared if she was tired. All they wanted was more. And so she gave it to them. Sleeping with the Enemy, Dying Young, The Pelican Brief, hit after hit. Julia became an unstoppable machine. But inside, the little girl from Georgia, the one who used to hide in her room from a cruel stepfather, was still there. Watching, waiting, asking when she could finally breathe. She climbed the golden ladder they built for her, but with every step, she lost a little more of herself. By the mid-1990 seconds, Julia Roberts had become more than just an actress. She was a cultural force. Her films weren't just successful, they were events. People didn't just watch Julia on screen, they believed her. From the fierce legal crusader in Erin Brockovich to the love-struck bookshop visitor in Notting Hill, Julia made even the most scripted lines feel like confession. She became the highest-paid actress in the world, the first woman to break the $20 million per film barrier. That number alone was revolutionary. In an industry where men had long dominated paychecks and power, Julia cracked the glass ceiling with a smile and a sharp sense of negotiation behind it. But power in Hollywood comes with its own poison. The more successful she became, the more isolated she felt. Her relationships were dissected in real time. Her body was scrutinized in every tabloid. If she gained 5 pounds, it was a scandal. If she looked tired, they said she was falling apart. The same media that crowned her America's sweetheart now hunted her like prey, not for who she was, but for any sign she was failing to be perfect. She tried to outrun it. She changed roles, took on deeper, darker characters, Closer, the Mexican, Mona Lisa Smile. Critics sometimes followed, sometimes didn't. But Julia kept pushing, not for fame, but for freedom. Yet no matter what she did, the headlines always circled back to one thing: her smile. People called her timeless. But time was exactly what she felt slipping away. Behind the scenes, she was fighting battles no one knew about: panic attacks, insomnia, the kind of fatigue that doesn't go away with rest because it's not physical, it's spiritual. A deep ache from being watched for too long, judged for too much, and loved too conditionally. She once described fame as being eaten alive, but slowly, and with applause. Even on set, the demands were relentless. Endless takes, PR tours, contracts that dictated everything from her hair to her public behavior. The very industry she had conquered now controlled every inch of her existence. She found brief refuge in her work with directors who respected her space, like Steven Soderbergh, who gave her the role of a lifetime in Erin Brockovich. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't polished. It was raw, angry, messy, and real. Julia won the Academy Award for Best Actress, but more than that, she earned back something far more valuable: the right to be complex. And yet, the applause didn't fix the silence inside. She had reached the summit of fame, but it was cold up there, and very, very quiet. At her peak, Julia Roberts had everything: money, fame, accolades, global love. But she also carried something no one could see: the exhaustion of constantly being enough for the world, but never quite enough for herself. Fame doesn't destroy people overnight. It chips away, slowly, quietly. And for Julia Roberts, the damage was cumulative, not explosive, but corrosive. After the global success of Erin Brockovich, everyone expected her to bask in the spotlight. She had just won an Oscar. She was at the top. But instead of celebration, Julia recoiled. She vanished from the public eye. For months, she declined scripts, turned down interviews, and left Hollywood guessing. The truth? She was unraveling not publicly, but deeply. Behind closed doors, Julia was haunted by more than just exhaustion. She was dealing with a complicated web of emotional wounds that fame had kept buried. Relationships had become transactional. Friendships were rare, shallow. She couldn't trust people, not even those closest to her. Every interaction felt like a performance, every smile a negotiation. The smile that made her famous had become her prison. Then came the greatest heartbreak of her adult life: the death of her half-sister, Nancy Moats, in 2014. Nancy was only 37, found in a bathtub, an apparent suicide. The note she left behind made headlines. It spoke of deep resentment, feelings of abandonment, and a plea to be seen. The world was shocked. But for Julia, it wasn't just grief, it was guilt. Nancy had long felt like the forgotten sibling, living in the shadow of Hollywood royalty. In interviews, she had alluded to a tense relationship with Julia. And though the public devoured the story, Julia never defended herself. She disappeared, refused to speak. No press conferences, no statements, just silence. Friends said she was shattered, that she blamed herself, that for weeks she didn't leave the house. The tragedy reopened every wound Julia had fought. So hard to hide the broken childhood, the weight of public life, the feeling that no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. She had built a fortress of fame to protect herself, but when grief knocked, it walked right through the front door. And that wasn't all. Her marriage, once a rare sanctuary from the madness, was straining under pressure. Julia had married cinematographer Danny Moder in 2002, far from the Hollywood spotlight, in a quiet ranch wedding in Taos, New Mexico. For years, they were inseparable. But fame follows. Rumors about separation began to circulate. Tabloids speculated relentlessly. Julia ignored them until she couldn't. She began withdrawing further, choosing motherhood, privacy, simplicity over premieres and interviews. At one point, a reporter asked her why she had stopped appearing in films. She smiled, paused, and said, "I was tired of playing a version of myself that made other people comfortable." It was subtle, but it was a confession. Julia Roberts wasn't burning out. She was walking away by choice, and the world, used to seeing her shine, didn't know what to make of her absence. In front of millions, she had always been the light. But now, she chose the dark not because she was broken, but because she needed to heal. There was no dramatic comeback, no red carpet return, no public declaration of rebirth. Julia Roberts did something far more radical. She stopped performing. For the first time since she was 20, Julia chose a life not defined by cameras, scripts, or critics. She chose quiet. It started with the ranch in New Mexico. Surrounded by desert skies and cottonwood trees, far from the noise of Los Angeles, Julia began to build a new world. No stylists, no publicists, just her husband, Danny Moder, and their 3 children. They gardened, cooked, took long hikes. She wore flannel shirts and no makeup. She didn't care who saw because no one was watching. And that's exactly how she wanted it. She became a mother, fiercely protective and present. Julia once said, "Nothing I've done in film compares to the miracle of raising my children." It wasn't a press line, it was truth. The woman who had once been America's fantasy girl was now simply mom. She drove carpools, attended school plays, took her kids to the grocery store, not as a superstar, as a human being. But she didn't vanish entirely. She began choosing projects not for fame or money, but for meaning. She lent her voice to causes she believed in: UNICEF, environmental justice, women's health. She narrated documentaries about endangered oceans, traveled to India to raise awareness on energy poverty, and advocated for reproductive rights without needing applause. In 2018, she returned to television for the first time in the Amazon Prime series Homecoming. It was dark, unsettling, psychological. Not the Julia people remembered, and that was the point. She wasn't returning to her old self. She was stepping into her full self, layered, haunted, and free from the need to be adored. Critics called her performance restrained brilliance. But for Julia, it wasn't about reviews anymore. She was past chasing validation. She had learned, finally, to smile for no one but herself. She once reflected, "I spent so long trying to be what people needed me to be. Now, I'm just trying to be someone my children can be proud of." That line, simple as it sounds, was everything. It wasn't a rejection of her past. It was a release. And with that release came peace. She had once been the woman who gave the world everything. Now she was the woman who had finally learned how to keep something for herself. Julia's life didn't need to be loud to be meaningful. She found power in presence, not publicity. Fulfillment in being seen by a few, not by everyone. And in that choice, she redefined success. not as box office numbers, magazine covers, or awards, but as wholeness. There was a time when Julia Roberts' smile was owned by the world, sold, adored, dissected. A symbol, a brand, a myth. But behind it was always a woman, bruised, brilliant, and quietly searching for her own voice. And she found it. Not through applause, but through silence. Not in fame, but in freedom. She no longer needed to dazzle. She only needed to be whole. And in doing so, Julia Roberts did something few stars ever manage. She turned away from the stage and toward herself. Today, she lives without fanfare. She laughs without cameras. She smiles not because the world demands it, but because she chooses to. And somehow, that smile now means more than it ever did on screen. They owned her smile, but never her soul. So, maybe the real story of Julia Roberts isn't about Hollywood at all. Maybe it's about every woman who has ever been told to be perfect. Every person who has ever performed just to be accepted. Every soul who has ever felt invisible until they decided not to be. And maybe that's the role she was meant to play all along.